If you have wealth, if you have a second passport and you live in the US, if you have options, if you have some amount of access to power, for now, you're fine. Everything is fantastic. This, of course, translates to a feeling of risk tolerance in the marketplace. IPOs and M&As can start to happen again. Valuation compression starts to ease off, which means valuations of early stage startups can be a little higher. Capital can flow more easily. Elon Musk and his Doge department are going to free up regulations, which will allow startups to be more innovative. This is fantastic news in the short term for the tech ecosystem.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Podcast Reacts. This week we are going to talk about, I'll give you two guesses what we're going to talk about.
I don't know, I think we're going to talk about my travels, right, Chris?
Yes, we're talking about your travels, we're going to talk about the weather. No, we're going to talk about the Trump victory, the election that just occurred. How did it happen? How did technology and the tech ecosystem play a role? What does it mean for markets, for crypto, and for startups and scale-up founders? We're going to try to keep it pragmatic and talk about how it affects your everyday startup life. We're also going to go off into some tangents about what does the politics mean? Why do people vote this way? And what does it mean existentially for the future of humanity and everything we hold dear? All this and much, much more on this week's show. Stay tuned right after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right, let's jump into our one and only topic, Yaniv. There's really nothing else to talk about. On November 5th, 2024, Mr. Donald Trump has become, once again, President-elect of the United States for his second go at running the country. Not only did he win the Electoral College, as he did in 2016, he won the popular vote. The Republicans are going to take the Senate, the House. They effectively control the courts through many judges and, of course, the Supreme Court. They have a massive media apparatus. They have effectively neutralized the liberal or left or mainstream media through their rhetoric. He's taken over. He now controls the US and through the US, the free world. I'm in the thick of it. I'm here in Silicon Valley. I'm watching it unfold with my friends, many of whom are liberal, but some of whom were going for Trump. And so I'm a bit close to it here, Yaniv. Let's start with your perspective from the outside. You're in Europe right now, traveling around, and of course, live in Australia. What did you see happen?
It's really interesting. I think what we're seeing now is that people kind of think they know what they're getting with Donald Trump, and enough people like it that they are willing to vote for him. And like you said, he won the popular vote, and he did it his way, right? And I think what's been even more interesting, so, we're recording this a couple of weeks after the election, and we did want to wait for things to settle a bit to see how things actually played out. He started to announce his cabinet appointments, and, when he won in 2016, he announced some relatively sober, sensible people to his cabinet, people who you would call relatively mainstream Republican picks. Now, all of his people are his people. And so, he's won it his way. He's going to govern his way. And I think now that we're going to see Trump unshackled, we will, I guess, get a sense of, first of all, whether some of the more dire warnings about him are valid. And second of all, if the people who voted for him are actually prepared for what it is that he wants to do, and for him to potentially this time keep more of his promises.
All right, so let's talk about, firstly, how did this happen? And then what happens next for startups and the tech ecosystem in general. I think the first thing to note in terms of how this happened is that it was very much a Silicon Valley election. JD Vance comes from Silicon Valley in the VC community. Kamala Harris comes from Oakland, San Francisco, in the Bay Area. They were both playing to the San Francisco base and the Silicon Valley Bay Area base. They both, Kamala a little bit later, were playing to the crowd, the Bitcoin crowd. And especially Trump had in his pocket a lot of Silicon Valley insiders, from Musk to Sachs to David Friedberg, and even Jason Calacanis was riding that fence hard, right? Musk ultimately went on Joe Rogan, and apparently a lot of the exit interviews were saying, wow, that Joe Rogan interview had a real effect. And obviously Joe Rogan's in Austin, he's not in Silicon Valley, but it's powered. Podcasting is the media apparatus powered by Silicon Valley technology. And so there was a lot of Silicon Valley powering this election, which is interesting because a lot of the rhetoric was, we don't want those Silicon Valley tech elites and those rich millionaires and billionaires telling us what to do. And yet it was an election, it was a campaign powered by millionaires and billionaires and tech elites. And so the dichotomy was stark, but also the power from this little community out here in the Bay Area was really quite telling.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to unpack there, Chris. So first of all, you talked about Kamala being from the Bay Area and JD Vance being a tech guy. Forget about them. They are kind of small fries. This is really about Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and all of his little mini-me's and stands, like you mentioned some of them, like Sachs and so on, who really were the puppet masters behind this election. JD Vance was put in by Peter Thiel. Elon Musk is acting like a full-blown oligarch at this point. He got Trump into power and now is hanging around Mar-a-Lago. He's been nominated to head the Department of Government Efficiency. So these are the tech guys who we are talking about who are really owning this thing, right? And so I think what's happened is the tech power brokers have aligned with Trump and they have gotten him into power in a lot of ways. And now they've bought this closeness. You call it a little community. This is the new center of power, of wealth in the United States and in the world. And so these guys are incredibly powerful, and they are now happy to wield their power with the person whose influence they can buy and whose I guess policy direction most suits their own personal inclinations and their own business needs. So I think that's the first thing that's happened, right? So it is tech in that sense. Tech is now wealth and power, and wealth and power have done what wealth and power really always do, which is try to get close to the levers of government. And they found a very willing person in Donald Trump who's very transactional to take that on. So I think that's the first thing. And then you talk about this being the podcast election and being on Joe Rogan. And of course, every podcaster, Chris, loves to talk about this because we're like, you know what? Podcasters have now got a bit of power and we're podcasters. So we must be a bit powerful now too. But I think it's very true, right? So traditional media people don't trust it, right? Like, how has Donald Trump gotten to where he has? It's because people have lost trust in mainstream institutions, whether it's media, whether it is academia, whether it is the regular arms of government and so on. And so they're looking to blow things up a little bit. So who do they trust? They trust people who come from outside the system. And I guess the beauty of podcasters and podcasts as a medium is that it doesn't come up through a sort of centralized and, more to the point, legacy power structure, but comes up more organically, and to the extent it is supported by a power structure, and it is. Joe Rogan is backed by Spotify. It is not the old media. And so people just like that. It feels more authentic. It feels less edited. It feels raw. And so people are more likely to listen to their politicians when they're on a podcast than when they are on a Meet the Press style show on mainstream cable. And so, yes, I think it's very clear that these alternate channels are becoming a very powerful way to influence elections.
Yeah. And, the question I think has to be like, why are the tech elite, many of them, not all of them, many of them aligning themselves with Trump? And I think there's the stated goals, and then there is maybe some of the hidden goals. Now, you talked about the hidden goals, right? Power aligns itself with power. Money aligns itself with power. And, I think some of these guys cravenly believe that they can, puppet Trump a little bit. They can free up regulation in their direction. Their stated goals, it's questionable how true they are, whether they're just kind of fig leaves that they're standing behind or narratives they're standing behind. But they claim to be concerned about meritocracy, right? They believe DEI programs are out of control, that decisions are being made based on gender and identity politics, and they want to restore meritocracy to corporate and government life. This is what
Sorry,
they
Chris.
claim.
The irony of that is just so thick and juicy. They put themselves behind the least qualified person to ever be president, who is filling his cabinet with people who are the least qualified people to ever run their departments, while they're shouting meritocracy. It lacks credibility.
Yeah, and not just people that are not credible and competent, but people that are themselves been accused of crimes and disgusting things as well, and violations of the most basic and pragmatic forms of DEI and kind of and new social norms, right? And so themselves would have been cancelled were it not for a kind of a backlash against cancelling. Again, just to continue with the counter argument, because unfortunately we don't have somebody on the other side here, they would argue that they're looking to blow up these institutions, to not run them competently or in the way that they've been run. They want to fundamentally reshape them or dismantle them. That's their argument. And you mentioned that people have lost faith in institutions. This is a refrain I've heard over and over and over again. But very, very few times do I hear someone follow up and say, part of the reason that they've lost faith in the institutions is because of Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump is a symptom of people's loss of faith. The media from the Iraq War and after 9/11 and all this sort of stuff were complicit in a lot of that. Government departments have failed to deliver on their roles and their missions, in many cases overreached with extreme versions of DEI and so on. But at the same time, Trump is the symptom, and he is now the cause of this loss of faith. He has said that the media is the enemy of the people. He has undermined the courts and stacked the Supreme Court. He has, he has circumvented government departments and norms and policies. He has claimed the election is stolen. And so when people go, you have Vivek Ramaswamy and whatever going, people have lost faith in our elections. It's like, that's because your guy has made them question elections. Like, this is a constant right-wing drumbeat that you cannot trust anything you see, anything you hear, anything that has been set up to serve you. And so, of course, they've lost faith. They've been told to lose faith. And so both the symptom has become the cause, and we're now in this negative feedback loop. And of course, what happens if you lose faith in institutions? Well, you create space for a strongman to dismantle those institutions and put himself in their place, and to basically, destroy the organs of democracy. And so you're right. We are going to find out. We're going to find out in the next 4 years. I was saying to my friend, in some perverse way, in my heart of hearts, I'm actually quite excited, because I'm excited to find out just how right or delusional we were. Is he either going to be an authoritarian wannabe when we're either going to hang on by a thread, or things will fail, and we were fundamentally not crazy and confused, or is he going to be fine and everything will be okay, and he'll break some eggs and then he'll leave? And I'm actually quite excited to find out which it is, because I want to understand if my worldview is completely out of whack or not, because it's something that's driving me nuts.
Yeah, we'll see. There's something thrilling about watching destruction. Unfortunately, this is probably going to hurt quite a lot of people. But, I think even if Trump does some of the things that we worry he will do, that doesn't mean it's going to be bad for everyone. What the person like this might do is basically broaden the gap between those who have privilege and those who do not, right? So life isn't necessarily going to get worse for everyone. And maybe, Chris, that's sort of a good segue into what's happening next, which is Trump won the election, markets are up, crypto is up, and it kind of feels like an exciting time to be a startup. What do we actually think is going to happen? Are the markets right? Is this going to be a good time for tech overall? Or is it sort of the political and sort of civilizational risk kind of outweighing the potential commercial benefits here?
Well, I mean, if you think of the stock market as like a weighing machine, right? It's the ultimate voting machine. The prognosticators, the capital allocators, think this is going to be fantastic, right? On the day of or the week of the election, everything was up 10, 15, 20%. Things have come down a little bit with the stock market, but are bouncing again. Crypto is just up. It's like $92,000-$93,000 US right now. Bitcoin, that is. So, as you say, if you have wealth, if you have a second passport and you live in the US, if you have options, if you have some amount of access to power, for now, you're fine. Everything is fantastic. This, of course, translates to more a feeling of risk tolerance in the marketplace. IPOs and M&As can start to happen again. Valuation compression starts to ease off, which means valuations of early stage startups can be a little higher. Capital can flow more easily. Elon Musk and his Doge department are going to free up regulations, which will allow startups to be more innovative. This is fantastic news in the short term for the tech ecosystem. As you say, though, does increasing instability occur? And therefore, does it become harder to predict what will happen politically, economically, and so on? That's yet to play out, and it's hard to predict. So we'll have to see what happens over the next few years.
The underlying sentiment here is that a democratic government, and perhaps a government that is more traditional, likes to put the brakes on some of the excesses of capitalism, right? They like to redistribute wealth. They have a bureaucracy. They might want to regulate things that they think do not serve the common good. They might, come down on gambling. They might come down on things that leave victims in their wake, capitalist activities, right? They care about climate change, and so they might put costs on businesses that are to do with mitigating climate change. All of this stuff goes away, right? And so businesses are free to do what they kind of want to do the most, which is pursue the profit motive. And if they are free to do that, it makes sense that they will get more profit. And that is what's driving that growth in the market. So yeah, let's sort of drill in a little bit more, Chris, into if you're running a tech startup, what does this mean for you, right? Like, you're just doing your thing. Maybe you're raising a pre-seed, a seed, a Series A. You're trying to find product market fit. And suddenly Donald Trump is president. What might you do differently? What might change in your expectations or your calculus as a result of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, crypto and fintech is back on the agenda, right? Because regulatory frameworks for Bitcoin, for crypto in general, are going to get much, much clearer. At the very least, the government's going to get less litigious about enforcing the vague lack of laws that there are now. At the very best, new laws are going to be placed into the scene. They're going to create certainty and clarity for everybody. And so this is back on the table. I think everyone's going to get very excited again. The FOMO's already occurring, as we said.
I'm not sure if everyone's going to get very excited again, because I'm not. So
why are you not excited?
Crypto has had a bad couple of years, right? Absolutely. And they've had a very good time blaming regulatory uncertainty for those bad couple of years. And definitely, I would say, obviously, all the coins have shot up. I would say Bitcoin, and I've said this for a while, but I think this cements Bitcoin as a real store of value, no doubt. That digital gold idea, I think that is now there, right? Bitcoin is never going away. I'm comfortable saying that. But as for a lot of the other coins, sort of the more utility coins, I think all of the Web3, the DeFi, all of these things that, thank goodness, I haven't had to spend that much time listening to for a while. Part of their issue, I would argue the main issue, is they never proved that utility, right? And I think regulation was an easy scapegoat. So now they have a favorable regulatory environment, and they better put up or shut up, because they're out of excuses. There has never been a technology that has promised so much and delivered so little. And so, okay, all right, everybody, it is time to show what you're capable of. And I think, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I do think that a lot of folks are not going to be as excited to invest in all of these Web3, DeFi, DAO, whatever stuff this time around. There will be an initial bump, but unless that utility comes pretty soon this time, I think you'll find the heat goes right back out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've advised and worked with many crypto companies, and I've said to them, and I'll say to the audience here, many of them were technologies in search of a problem. Many of them had no problem or utility in mind. And we would spend most of the time going back to first principles, trying to understand, like, where is there an actual problem? Where is there an actual product solution? Where is the roadmap? Where are the iterations?
Yeah, well, I think
What
that
is
the problem is that
what is-
for most of these companies, the problem is I'm poor and I want not to be, right? And that was sort of the grift that stood in crypto. I mean, maybe that's cynical, but that is really what happened with
I
most
think
of
that is
crypto,
I think
right?
that is cynical. I think that is cynical. That many of the founders I met in crypto got very excited, participated in a lot of the excitement that was around, took a lot of money off the table through ICOs and the crypto investment community, and then are still working really hard to figure out how to deliver value for their ecosystem. And they're grinding, grinding, grinding. But many of these founders don't have any product experience. They don't have a team that understands product and have not understood how to go back to first principles and try to solve a real problem. Now, is there a problem to solve? Does the tokenomics and the token actually help? Is there a there there? That's a different story. But at least the founders who've reached out to me are very well-meaning and earnest in their attempt to build a business and to justify the money they collected. I'm sure there are huge swaths of crypto people who are just like, thank you very much, I'm going to Florida now. But I think that there are a lot of flavors of the rainbow there.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the crypto thing in general. I think the Bitcoin thing specifically, CNBC is just salivating, right? It's become the Bitcoin watch hour every hour on CNBC. And there are a lot of fund managers and capital allocators that are like, hell yes, let's do this. And so that's going to be very interesting. I'm probably almost a Bitcoin maximalist in the sense that I really believe in Bitcoin as the primary application for blockchain, and over the long term will be one of the primary stores of value. And so I'm not all in on Bitcoin, but I'm a third in on Bitcoin, let's say.
Wow.
And so I'm certainly very happy about the price of Bitcoin right now.
Yep, I think that makes sense. So yes, crypto, what we're saying is Bitcoin is a part of the global financial system now. It will only continue to be so, right? And then for everybody else, I'd say, yes, I imagine the funding market's going to defrost. But if you're a crypto startup and you're raising, you need to be able to say, this is how the change in regulatory regime makes things different for us. Because if you can't answer that question, I think it's still going to be quite difficult to make a commercial case here.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's definitely all of the as you say, all the product problems, all of the utility problems that crypto had don't go away. And so, yeah, people will take a second look, but you've got to have a real story there. So then the next thing that's moved up sharply, although it did correct a little bit, was the public markets. That was up, I think, as high as 10 or 15%, 20% for me with the Magnificent Seven especially. The S&P 500 was obviously a bit more mild than that. As I alluded to earlier, this is great news for startup founders and larger scale-ups because the public markets essentially set the valuation ceiling, right? They're saying a Google, a Facebook, or what have you is worth this much. Well, everything else is valued relative to that. And it's valued relative to that because your startup ultimately has to exit into that market. And so therefore your IPO has to achieve massive multiples. Or it has to exit into one of these larger companies. And so now that Lena Khan is going away and the valuation of these companies is going up, you have more headroom to exit into, which means that VCs will deploy more capital at higher valuations, which means that early stage VCs and angel investors will deploy more capital at higher valuations, which means you get more capital all along the way at higher valuations. And so this entire compression that's been happening is decompresses and thaws. And it thaws from the top down. And so this is very, very good news for startup founders. You have that tailwind as well as, of course, the AI tailwind and some of the fintech and crypto tailwind. This is just good all around for FOMO, and of course is likely to create another big bubble. And bubbles are fine. In Australia we try to eliminate bubbles, but in Silicon Valley and in the US, bubbles are part of the process. Everyone gets exuberant and excited, 1,000 flowers bloom, and then a whole bunch of decimation occurs, and the strong ones survive. And so this is kind of baked in, and where all the hot air is rushing in, thanks to all the tailwinds before Trump, and now the tailwinds thanks to Trump.
Actually, I was just going to say, and you kind of alluded to it at the end, it's not like the market was depressed before Trump won the election. In fact, the market has been on a tear for the last few years, which is one of the points that Harris and the Biden campaign
Yes.
tried unsuccessfully to make. It's like, you know what? Things are pretty good. And so the market was at all-time highs or near all-time highs, and then Trump won and they popped even more. And so what we have is a market that by any traditional metrics is massively overvalued, right? It was already frothy and now it's even frothier. So yes, it's good news, Chris. I think the question is going to be, can it stay here? Every time some of these metrics such as price to earnings ratios and so on have been this high, it has shortly been followed by a correction or a crash. And so, yeah, we'll need to see whether all this excitement keeps up. But as for right now, I would say if you're thinking, well, should I kick off a raise now or should I wait till early next year? Here's some very tactical advice. I would take some of the excitement that's happening now. And if you are ready, or if you can make yourself ready to raise soon, I would personally strike while the iron is hot there.
Yeah, now's the time to raise for all of those macroeconomic reasons. And especially because we don't know what turbulence might be ahead, if any, with the political, the reality of the Trump presidency, Trump 2. So, yeah, dive in now. I would say that's generally good advice at any time, Yaniv, which is if there is capital on the table at the right valuations, I would take it. One of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career is to say no to a term sheet, thinking I could go get better or we could raise later. I would, take the money, take it. It is better in your bank account than theirs. And so now is a good time, definitely.
I guess my point is more specifically is the good times might not last. I hope I'm wrong. I do hope I'm wrong, but there are a number of reasons to think, some of Trump's policies, if enacted, such as actually massively cutting government spending, such as forcibly removing illegal immigrants, these are inflationary and depressive policies, right? And so actually the economic consequences of these things could be fairly negative. I actually think the markets are betting it won't really happen. And so going back to my commentary earlier on, Chris, is there's this sort of weird game of chicken happening, which is last time Donald Trump got elected, he said he was going to do a bunch of stuff and he didn't do it. Not really. This time he's got elected and people are betting that he's not really going to do it again. But what if he does? And I'd be inclined to think this time he's much more likely to actually do the things, the fairly wild and radical things that he said he's going to do than last time around in 2016. Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
It's such a counterintuitive world we're living in right now, right? It's like the popular sentiment is that Trump is for the working class and the everyman, but his campaign and he himself are a collection of billionaires who care only about deregulation and taking over the country and the world. The economy and the stock market is rewarding his election, but yet his actions are just as likely, or his promised actions are just as likely to be inflationary and destabilize the world order. And so these things are so counterintuitive, which leads me, I spend a lot of time, Yaniv, thinking deeply about how I just might be fundamentally wrong. It's like where is the truth in what an Elon or a Vivek or a Sachs or a whatever are saying? What am I missing? And I've actually come to see an uncomfortable amount of truth in the way they frame what he says. So I'm being very precise here in my words, right? He tends to speak a lot of nonsense that seems relatively chaotic. But all of his surrogates, not all of them, but some of them, articulate a worldview that is counterintuitive to me, but I'm looking for the truth of it, the truth in it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can see some truth there, and I can see some truth there, and I can see some truth there, or I can see some counterintuitiveness there that might play out that way. But I cannot get past the fact that the guy denied the election and sat back and watched an insurrection, an inevitable insurrection occur. It was inevitable. Like, it was completely unsurprising to me what occurred. And continued to just look for 11,000 more votes, while basically using phrases from Mein Kampf. I can't get past that, right? Like, there are certain business things, certain social things, certain framings of things that if you listen to Musk, not on Twitter, but speaking, or Vivek, when you listen to them long form, there are things in there I'm like, oh, I can see that line of logic, how a lack of meritocracy leads to this and leads to that, and this bureaucracy, there is certainly kind of an establishment that is resistant to change. There's certainly a lot of waste and inefficiency. I can see the truth of those statements. But man, oh man, I can't get past just one basic thing of like, the guy is a fascist wannabe. And they seem to just keep ignoring that. They seem to keep saying, oh, it's fine. Now, he didn't really mean that. That's just liberal exaggeration. Like, what are you talking about? It's insane.
Yeah, well, ding ding, like you mentioned Mein Kampf. I know that a friend of the pod, Emil, doesn't like it when we compare anything that's happening with the Trump administration to what may have happened in Germany in the 1930s. But you've opened the seal, so let's talk about this a little bit.
You don't get to say immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country and then say there's no connective tissue.
I disagree with Emil, because this is not to say that Donald Trump and his team are Nazis, right? The point is to learn from history. And Germany in the 1930s was a great example of an advanced society with advanced institutions who was captured by a democratically elected leader who made people feel that, first of all, things were really bad. In the case of Germany, things were actually a lot more bad for the working class than they are in America in 2024. But he fed on that and he said, I have the solutions, right? And nobody stress tested those solutions. Right? So people are like, instead of saying things are bad, let's fix them, people were like, things are bad, let's blow them up and put all our trust in this one person. And whether or not that person ends up becoming Adolf Hitler, and I sure hope that Donald Trump doesn't, that way of running a country is just extremely dangerous and extremely anti-democratic. And it doesn't pass muster in terms of good governance, of saying, yes, of course there are problems in the world. Of course there are problems in America. Let's talk about how we fix them. Blowing everything up is to show so much disrespect for all of the institutions and all the people who died building them and protecting them, that it just beggars belief for me. I just can't see how people can get behind that.
Well, I mean, look, let me continue to be devil's advocate just because no one else on the show is going to do it on this episode. The argument is all of that is sunk cost and all of that is technical debt, and it doesn't effing matter. Let's just refactor the org, right?
Yep.
The problem with that is the org is designed to be bureaucratic. It's designed so that things cannot change in wild and thrashy ways, subject to the whim of one person. That's by design. And that, in my comments, I'll see people go, yeah, we need a strong man to lead America out of this, whatever. And it's like, I'm sorry, strong man is the problem. We need strong institutions. We need strong rule of law. We need effective, competent leadership. We do not need a strongman. A strongman is a class, a category of dictator, of fascist, who is ruling based on some imagined populist, mandate.
And whatever you think, it doesn't work out well for you, right? Like, let's put a purely selfish lens on all of this, perhaps, right? Vladimir Putin is a strong man. How's Russia's economy going? Adolf Hitler, how was Germany's economy in 1945? How's the Hungarian economy today? How's the Belarusian economy? Strong men do not lead to strong economies. And so if people just want to live a good life, this is not the way to go. And I think the lessons from history are so copious, including recent history, including the present. I just don't see how this is something that really makes any sense. But anyway, I think we've gotten back into politics a little bit, Chris.
Yaniv, you're assuming people follow history, and
yes.
I've learned lessons of history. I've also got friends who are just very, very close to these people, like much closer than I've ever been. One of them in particular is saying, "You don't get it, Chris. They're not actually that clever. They're good at one thing, maybe engineering or capital allocation. They're actually deficient, cognitively deficient in most other ways. And he's like, I was talking with admiration about one or two people, and he's like, you're speaking with admiration about people who are actually fundamentally pretty goddamn dumb. And so they are just as susceptible to these kinds of, populist narratives as anybody else, the very uneducated and the very, the ones that are hoping that his worst impulses will be moderated and mediated. But as I said at the very top of the episode, there are no meaningful guardrails left. None. Even the last one, the one that we actually rely on, and frankly, the ones that Democrats bump into all too often, which is shame and self-restraint. He has none of that. So there really is no guardrails. And then the other day I wrote a whole post about how either way the election goes, there is a meaningful chance, a meaningful pathway to meaningful violence. We're already talking about deploying the National Guard and the military to help with mass deportations. That is already part of the mainstream conversation. You can bet when that occurs, there will be left-wing protests. Those things will become violent, and we do not know what happens then. And so this is a dangerous place. And so if we're talking about startups and the implications for founders and VCs, we're in a high. We're in a sugar high right now. Everything is up. Go raise money. Go pitch your startups. Go enjoy your Bitcoin. But keep an eye out, because political and social unrest is possible, and I would say not unlikely. And so pay attention carefully to the news. And then also the last thing I'd say is while you're paying attention, don't be a victim of psychological warfare. So one thing I decided this cycle, unlike last cycle, is I'm going to watch it with a great deal of academic detachment, because I cannot afford to get emotionally entangled with it again. And you got to focus on your family and what you can control.
Yeah, I think as often happens in these discussions, Chris, we meander a bit through the politics and our own personal feelings, but I think we've gotten to a fairly sharp, startup-specific, founder-specific piece of advice, right? Which is that the thing that changes is that volatility is going to be much higher, right? Volatility and uncertainty. So there's this concept in markets of volatility, which is really, it's not about whether it goes up or down, but about how much it moves around, how unpredictable the market is. And I think the volatility in the world has gone way up. So right now, things are good. Things could get really incredibly good, right? Or things could get really pretty bad. And I'd say that sort of the error bars around the next 4 years are much wider than they would have been under a President Harris or, a President Romney or anyone from like a normal political background. And so you need to be prepared for a world of higher volatility. And that means taking those wins when you can, but discounting the future a whole lot more, right? I think high volatility means focus on the present, focus on what you can achieve now, take things to the bank, and do not rely on forecasts. Like we mock on this podcast all the time, Chris, the idea that a pre-revenue startup or a pre-product market fit startup can have a 5-year forecast. But, I think the visibility into the future has gotten even lower, right? The stock market now is at an all-time high. It could go up another 20%. It could go down 50% next week. And I think both of those are really, really quite plausible outcomes at the moment. These are not like at the extreme tails anymore. This could happen pretty easily. And so when you are plotting out your strategy, I actually think it just makes everything harder, but it really puts the premium on now a lot higher than it would in a predictable low volatility environment. So that, at least from me, Chris, I think you agree, is sort of the advice to founders on how to act in this new world.
Yeah, I would actually broaden it a little bit. I would say the error bars, I like the way you say that, error bar, the volatility quotient has been increasing consistently for years. My political awakening, my political consciousness is sort of around 9/11. And I'm sure there are examples before this, but everything has sort of become a reaction to a reaction to a reaction, and the reactions seem to be swinging more widely. So, from 9/11, we had, Bush's reaction to Bush's overreaction in Iraq and what have you. We have Obama against, I think a lot of people saw Obama and go, oh my God, we're losing our country. A brown and black man is in charge, which you get Trump. After Trump, you're like, that's crazy. Let's go back to normal. You go to Biden, right? And so there are these big swings, And we're also not even thinking about Brexit and all this other stuff. And so when you add AI and you add crypto, you add the decoupling of financial ties between China and Russia, where Europe is trying to decouple from energy from Russia, and US is, well, at least Trump is threatening to decouple from China economically. It's the coupling that has created a somewhat stable webbing. And so it's the decoupling and the supercharging of everything with AI that is going to make the volatility increase even further. And so, I think the volatility is not going back down anytime soon. And so, plan for a lot of volatility and potentially increasing volatility. And so, it's a long-term trend that will continue exponentially into the future, I think.
Well, I hope it doesn't continue exponentially into the future. And look, I don't 100% agree with that. Like,
well, singularity, right?
Well, yeah, maybe the singularity, but also history. I think one of the things that affects basically everybody under the age of 80 today is that we have lived through an unusually stable period in history. So a lot of what's happening is reversion to the mean, right? Like, people go, oh, the world's so crazy, everything's so bad. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, the world's about as crazy. It's probably about average. And, life's pretty good for more people than it has been ever. So I do have the sort of optimist in me that says, well, you can't expect sort of maximum stability always. And just because it's reverting to the mean doesn't mean it's just going to continue, in a straight line or in an exponential line, getting more and more chaotic. I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, look, it's so funny. I always play devil's advocate in conversations. So yeah, people who tell me things are getting crazy and worse ever, I'm often reminding them that everything is actually much better than it's ever been. The difference, though, Yaniv, right now is with the decoupling economically of everything and the superpowers that everybody is being given, right, with social networks and AI. We've gone from a few countries having nuclear weapons to many, many people having kind of nuclear information weapons. And so there's this kind of amplification of everything. And so, yes, we're reverting to the mean, and mean is generally more chaotic than the nice, comfortable spot we've had for the last, 50, 100 years. But when you combine chaos with individualized technology superpowers and the weapons platforms, the autonomous weapons platforms, which are sub-nuclear, right? So they're more likely to be deployed. This chaos can be amplified. And I was thinking the other day, this is quite a little while ago, I was thinking about this, which is if Trump were to win, which of course he has, he might be the first president to be able to deploy serious AI offensive and defensive technologies globally and domestically. So that is the kind, imagine a strongman in the AI era. We have different tools now, which I think changes the scale of things. Maybe not the style or the substance of them, but the scale of them, and which in turn changes the outcomes.
Well, damn, that's a cheery place to end on, Chris. So folks, it was great to be back. It was great chatting to you again, Chris. Hug your kids, kiss your spouse, give your mum a phone call, write us a review on Apple Podcasts, do all of those great things that make you feel good. And, enjoy the ride for the next few years, and we'll see you next week.
Catch you later, Yaniv.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.